The gunshot echoed across the valley as Beatrice Coleman lowered the smoking revolver, her blue eyes fixed on the rattlesnake she'd just dispatched. The year was 1875, and the unforgiving Montana Territory had been her home for nearly 2 years now, 2 years of solitude, hard work, and the kind of peace that came from depending on no one but herself. "Nice shot," came a deep voice from behind her. Beatrice whirled around, raising her gun instinctively. A tall man sat atop a chestnut stallion, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. His hands remained visible on the saddle horn, making no move toward the holstered gun at his hip. "State your business," she demanded, not lowering her weapon. "This is private property." The stranger nodded slowly. "Name's Colton Hayes, looking for work. Heard tell in town that the Coleman place might be hiring." Beatrice studied him for a long moment, taking in the weathered leather vest over his faded blue shirt, the well-worn chaps and boots that had clearly seen many miles. His face, now visible as he tilted his head, revealed a strong jaw shadowed with stubble and eyes the color of whiskey. "Heard wrong," she replied flatly. "I manage fine on my own." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Madam, with all due respect, your north fence is down in 3 places, your cattle are scattered halfway to the Blackfoot Territory, and winter's coming faster than you think." Her eyes narrowed. "You been spying on my land, been riding through, hard not to notice." He gestured toward the distant hills. "Got experience with ranching, could help get things squared away before the snow flies." "I don't need a savior," she said, finally lowering the gun but keeping her stance rigid. The cowboy replied with unexpected gentleness. "Good. I came to love you, not fix you." The words hung in the air between them, startling in their directness. Beatrice felt her cheeks flush with heat despite the cool autumn breeze. "That's mighty presumptuous for a man I just met," she managed to say, trying to keep her voice steady. Colton swung down from his horse with fluid grace, though he maintained a respectful distance. "Forgive me, that came out wrong." He removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "What I meant was, I'm not here to save anybody, just looking for honest work and maybe." He paused, those amber eyes meeting hers directly, "maybe something more in time, if that's what you want too." Beatrice had encountered plenty of men since her husband's death, drifters, cowboys, would-be suitors from town, all thinking she needed rescuing, that her independence was merely a temporary condition, until the right man came along. This stranger's words should have provoked the same irritation, yet something about his candor disarmed her. "Mr. Hayes, I don't know what tales you've heard in town, but I'm not some widow desperate for male attention. My husband's been dead 2 years, and I've managed this ranch just fine." "Never said you didn't." He placed his hat back on his head. "And I haven't heard any tales, just passing through saw a place that could use an extra hand." His eyes scanned the horizon. "Beautiful land you got here." Despite herself, Beatrice followed his gaze. The sprawling valley stretched before them, golden grass swaying in the breeze, the distant mountains capped with the first dusting of snow. It was beautiful, and it was hers, all 320 acres of it, claimed under the Homestead Act after John died. She'd worked every inch of this land, fought for it, bled for it. $3 a week plus room and board, she said abruptly. "Work from sunup to sundown, first sign of trouble you're gone." Surprise flickered across his face, quickly replaced by a smile that created creases at the corners of his eyes. "Yes, madam, when do I start?" "Now, get your horse settled in the barn, then meet me by the corral. We've got calves to round up before dark." As Colton led his stallion toward the barn, Beatrice wondered if she'd lost her mind. She hadn't hired help since the last ranch hand tried to pressure her into selling to the big cattle company that had been eyeing her water rights. Something about Colton Hayes felt different, though she couldn't quite name why. Whatever his reasons for being here, she'd make one thing clear: this was her land, her life, and she wasn't looking for anyone to save her from either. The first week proved that Colton knew his way around a ranch. He fixed the north fence in 2 days, rounded up the scattered cattle with minimal direction, and even repaired the leaking roof on the barn, all without being asked. He worked from first light until well after dusk, taking his meals quickly before heading back out to finish whatever task was at hand. Beatrice found herself watching him from the kitchen window as she prepared dinner, noting the capable way he handled the livestock, the gentle murmur he used to calm the skittish young mare she'd been breaking. At night, he retired to the small bunkhouse adjacent to the barn without complaint, though she knew it must be drafty with the autumn winds picking up. By the 8th day, as they worked side by side mending tack in comfortable silence, Beatrice decided to break their unspoken agreement to keep conversation to a minimum. "Where did you learn ranching?" she asked, her hands continuing to work the leather strap she was repairing. Colton glanced up, seeming pleased at her initiative. "Born to it. My father had a spread in Texas, not big but enough to teach a boy what matters. Texas is a long way from Montana. War has a way of making distances seem smaller." His voice held no bitterness, just a matter of factness that spoke of acceptance. "Rode with the Confederate cavalry. When it ended, home wasn't there anymore. Been working my way north ever since." Beatrice nodded, understanding more than she let on. The war had changed everything for so many. "What brought you to this part of the country?" Heard the territory was opening up. "Thought maybe I'd find a place to put down roots." He hesitated, then added, "What about you? Not many women running a ranch alone in these parts." She could have bristled at the question, but there was genuine curiosity in his tone, not judgment. "My husband John and I came out in '68. He'd fought for the Union, had his fill of cities and people afterward, wanted open spaces." Her fingers traced the worn saddle horn. "He died of fever 2 winters ago. I stayed. Must have been hard." "Life is hard," she replied simply. "Doesn't mean you quit." Colton nodded, respect evident in his expression. "No, madam, it surely doesn't." They resumed their work, but something had shifted between them. That evening, when Beatrice called him in for supper, she'd set the table for 2 instead of sending him off with a plate to eat in the bunkhouse. Over the next few weeks, as autumn deepened toward winter, they fell into a rhythm. Days were filled with the endless tasks of preparing the ranch for the cold months ahead, securing buildings, ensuring adequate hay was stored, checking that the cattle had access to water sources that wouldn't freeze solid. Evenings often found them sharing meals at her kitchen table, their conversations growing longer as they discovered shared interests in books and music. Beatrice learned that Colton had taught himself to read during long campaigns, borrowing dog-eared novels from fellow soldiers. He developed a particular fondness for Shakespeare, which surprised her until he explained that the drama and poetry spoke to something in him that the harshness of war had nearly extinguished. For his part, Colton discovered that Beatrice had been the daughter of a schoolteacher in Pennsylvania, educated beyond what was typical for women of her generation. She played the piano that sat unused in her front room, though she hadn't touched it since John died. Why not? He asked one evening as they sat before the fire, the first snow of the season swirling outside the windows. Beatrice stared into the flames. It felt frivolous after. There was so much work and music seemed to belong to another life. "Music isn't frivolous," Colton said softly. "It's necessary. Reminds us we're more than just what we do to survive." She met his gaze, startled by the insight. "Perhaps. Would you play something for me?" His request was gentle, without pressure. Beatrice hesitated, then rose and moved to the piano. The keys were slightly out of tune from disuse, but her fingers remembered. She began with something simple, a folk melody her mother had taught her, but soon lost herself in the music, playing pieces she'd once known by heart. When she finally stopped, she realized nearly an hour had passed, and Colton had simply sat listening, his expression one of quiet appreciation. "Thank you," he said, and the words carried a weight beyond the simple courtesy. That night, lying in her bed listening to the wind howl around the eaves, Beatrice acknowledged to herself that Colton Hayes had become more than just a hired hand. His presence had somehow rekindled parts of herself she'd tucked away after John's death, not just the music, but laughter, conversation, the simple pleasure of sharing a day's experiences with someone who understood. It frightened her, this gradual awakening. Independence had been her armor, her purpose. What would happen if she allowed herself to need someone again? The question remained unanswered as winter settled over the valley. Snow piled in drifts against the house and barn, transforming the landscape into a pristine blanket of white broken only by the dark shapes of pines and the paths they shoveled daily between buildings. The isolation that winter brought to remote ranches was profound. Weeks could pass without seeing another soul beyond the boundaries of their property. In this cocoon of snow and silence, Beatrice and Colton grew closer still. Long evenings were spent reading aloud by lamplight, teaching each other card games, or simply talking. He told her of his travels across the changing nation after the war, the boom towns sprouting along rail lines, the vast herds of buffalo he'd seen before the mass hunting began, the Sioux and Cheyenne camps he'd traded with when relations were still peaceful. She shared stories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her journey west with John, and the early days of building the ranch when hope had still outweighed hardship. What she didn't speak of was the loneliness after John's death, the fear that had kept her awake those first nights alone, or the determination that had driven her to prove to everyone, perhaps mostly to herself, that she could succeed on her own. One bitter January night, as a blizzard raged outside, Colton stoked the fire while Beatrice finished washing the supper dishes. The howling wind suddenly brought a sharp banging sound from somewhere outside. "Barn door must have come loose," Colton said, already pulling on his heavy coat. "I'll secure it. I'll come with you," Beatrice replied, reaching for her own coat. "2 sets of hands will make it quicker." He started to object, concern evident in his expression, but she fixed him with a look that brooked no argument. They ventured out together, the driving snow nearly blinding them as they made their way to the barn. Inside, they found the side door had indeed broken free of its latch and was swinging violently, allowing snow to drift in and the animals to grow restless. Working together, they secured the door with a length of rope as a temporary measure. As they turned to leave, Beatrice slipped on the icy floor. Colton caught her before she fell, his strong hands steadying her at the waist. They stood frozen for a moment, their breath forming clouds in the cold air, faces inches apart. "Beatrice," he whispered, her name a question and a statement all at once. She didn't pull away. For months, she had been fighting the growing attraction between them, clinging to her independence like a shield. Yet in that moment, with his arms around her and his eyes reflecting the lantern light, she couldn't remember why. "Colton," she responded, her voice barely audible above the storm. He lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to step back, but she found herself rising on her toes instead, meeting him halfway. His lips were warm despite the cold, gentle yet insistent against hers. The kiss deepened, speaking of longing too long denied, of desire carefully banked but never extinguished. When they finally parted, Beatrice felt dizzy, her heart racing beneath her woolen coat. Colton's expression was a mixture of wonder and uncertainty, as if he couldn't quite believe what had happened. "I didn't plan that," he said hoarsely. "Neither did I." She touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the imprint of his kiss. The moment stretched between them, fragile and new. Then a particularly strong gust rattled the barn, bringing them back to their surroundings. "We should get back to the house," Beatrice said, practical concerns reasserting themselves. "The storm's getting worse." Colton nodded, though reluctance was evident in his movements. They made their way back through the blizzard, his hand firmly holding hers to keep them together in the whiteout conditions. Once inside, they shed their snow-covered outer garments in silence, both acutely aware of the shift that had occurred between them. Standing in the warmth of her kitchen, Beatrice found herself at a crossroads. She could retreat behind her walls of independence, pretend the kiss had been a moment of weakness brought on by the isolation of winter and proximity. Or she could acknowledge the truth that Colton Hayes had become essential to her in ways that went far beyond his role as a ranch hand. Before she could decide, he spoke. "I should go back to the bunkhouse." "It's freezing out there," she said, the practical concern genuine even as her mind raced with other considerations. "The temperature's dropping by the minute. All the same, I think it's best." His eyes met hers, warm with everything left unsaid. "Unless you ask me to stay." The ball was in her court now. Beatrice took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Stay," she said simply, "not because of the storm, because I want you to." His expression softened with relief and something deeper. "Are you sure? I meant what I said that first day." "I didn't come here to fix anything. You don't need fixing, Beatrice. You're the strongest person I've ever known." "I know." She moved closer to him, allowing herself to reach out and touch his face. "That's why I can say this now. I don't need you, Colton. My life was complete before you rode onto my land, but I want you in it, not because you make it easier, but because you make it richer." He caught her hand in his, pressing a kiss to her palm. "That's all I've wanted, to be chosen, not needed." That night, Beatrice invited Colton into her bed. Their lovemaking was tender at first, both of them rediscovering intimacy after long absences, learning each other's bodies with reverent touches and whispered encouragements. As their confidence grew, so did their passion, until they moved together with an urgency that left them breathless and spent in each other's arms. Afterward, lying with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Beatrice marveled at how natural it felt to be with him this way. There was no sense of surrender, no fear that she had somehow compromised the independence she'd fought so hard to establish. Instead, she felt expanded, as if her capacity for joy had suddenly doubled. "What are you thinking?" Colton asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I never expected this," she admitted. "After John died, I thought that part of my life was over. I convinced myself I was content alone." "Were you content?" She considered the question honestly. "Yes, in many ways. I took pride in what I accomplished, in surviving when everyone expected me to fail or give up." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "But there's a difference between contentment and happiness. I'd forgotten that." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch reverent. "You've brought me happiness I didn't think I'd find again, after the war. Well, a man sees things that change him. Makes it hard to believe in good things lasting. Is that why you've been drifting all these years?" Colton nodded. "Partly, also been looking for somewhere that felt right, somewhere I could belong." His eyes held her steadily. "Found it here with you." The words sent a flutter through her chest, a mixture of elation and fear. "What does that mean exactly?" "Whatever you want it to mean," he replied, understanding her caution. "I'm not asking for promises, Beatrice, just a chance to see where this leads." She settled back against him, comforted by his patience. "One day at a time, then." "One day at a time," he agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. They fell asleep entwined, the blizzard raging outside but powerless against the warmth they'd created together. The winter passed in a haze of contentment neither had anticipated. Days were filled with the work of maintaining the ranch through the harsh Montana winter, breaking ice on water troughs, ensuring the cattle had access to hay, repairing equipment in preparation for spring. Nights were spent in conversation, laughter, lovemaking, and increasingly, planning for the future. Colton proved himself not just a capable hand but a man with vision. He saw potential in the ranch that even Beatrice, who loved the land fiercely, hadn't recognized. He suggested expanding their cattle operation, showed her how certain sections of the property could support more livestock with proper management, and drew up plans for improvements to the irrigation system come spring. "You've got good water rights here," he explained one evening as they pored over a rough map of the property he'd sketched. "Better than most in the valley. With some work, we could increase the grazing area by at least 50 acres. Beatrice noted his use of "we," but didn't comment on it. Over the months, They'd fallen into a partnership that felt natural, though they'd never formally discussed his status beyond that first agreement. He was no longer a hired hand, they both knew that, but neither had they defined what he was instead. That would mean more cattle, she mused, following his reasoning. More cattle means more hands needed for the roundup and drive. Could hire seasonal help, Colton suggested. Or, he hesitated, then continued, could take on a partner, someone with a stake in seeing it succeed. She looked up sharply, studying his face. Are you proposing a business arrangement, Mr. Hayes? A smile played at the corners of his mouth. Among other things, Miss Coleman, the air between them charged with possibility. Beatrice set down the pencil she'd been using to make notes. What other things might you be proposing? Colton took her hand, his expression growing serious. I love you, Beatrice. Have since before I knew what was happening. I want to build a life with you, not just working this land, but sharing everything that comes with it. The good years and the lean ones. Her heart raced at his declaration, though it wasn't entirely unexpected. They'd been moving toward this moment for months. Still, hearing the words spoken aloud made them real in a way that changed everything. I love you too, she said softly, the admission both frightening and freeing. But I need you to understand something. This ranch is mine, I worked for it, fought for it. I can't just— I'm not asking you to give up anything, he interrupted gently. Least of all your independence. That fire in you is what I fell in love with. He squeezed her hand. I'm asking if there's room in your life for me to stand beside you, not in front of you or behind you. Tears pricked at Beatrice's eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She blinked them back, touched by his understanding. There's room, she whispered. There's been room since that day you rode up and had the audacity to tell me my fence was down. Colton laughed, the sound warm in the quiet room. Wasn't my smoothest introduction, I'll grant you that. It was honest, she countered. You've always been honest with me. Even when you said that ridiculous thing about coming to love me, not fix me. Not so ridiculous now, is it? His eyes crinkled with affection. No, she admitted. Not ridiculous at all. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, holding it out to her. It was a ring, simple, a gold band with a modest sapphire that caught the lamplight. Bought this in town last time I went for supplies, he explained. Been carrying it around, waiting for the right moment. He held her gaze steadily. Beatrice Coleman, will you marry me? Be my partner in all things? She looked at the ring, then at the man offering it, this man who had ridden into her life and upended all her careful plans for solitude. Who had respected her boundaries while gradually showing her that letting someone in didn't mean losing herself. Who loved her strength instead of being threatened by it. Yes, she said, her voice clear and certain. Yes, I'll marry you, Colton Hayes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. When they parted, both were smiling, the future stretching before them full of possibility. Spring arrived in a rush of melting snow and green shoots pushing through the sodden earth. With the changing season came increased activity on the ranch and the need to finalize their plans. Beatrice and Colton agreed to marry in April, before the busiest work of the season began. They rode into the town of Whitehorn together to arrange for the ceremony with the circuit preacher, and to file the necessary paperwork to make Colton a legal partner in the ranch. The lawyer seemed surprised when Beatrice insisted on maintaining her legal ownership of the original homestead, while adding Colton as an equal partner in the expanded operation they were planning. Unusual arrangement, he commented, peering at them over his spectacles. Most women would simply transfer everything to their husband's name. I'm not most women, Beatrice replied evenly. No, she certainly isn't, Colton added with pride, and I wouldn't want it any other way. The lawyer shrugged and drew up the papers as requested. When they left his office, documents signed and witnessed, Beatrice felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had protected what was hers while still making room for their shared future. It was, she thought, a perfect representation of the relationship they had built. The wedding itself was small but joyful. A handful of neighbors and acquaintances from town gathered at the ranch house, which Beatrice and Colton had spent days preparing for the occasion. Fresh paint brightened the walls, new curtains hung at the windows, and vases of early wildflowers adorned every surface. Beatrice wore a dress of deep blue silk ordered from a catalog months earlier, with her mother's lace shawl draped around her shoulders. Colton, resplendent in a new black suit, watched her walk toward him with an expression of such undisguised adoration that several of the women present dabbed at their eyes. The preacher's words were traditional, but resonated with special meaning for the couple who had found each other against all odds. When they exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other all the days of their lives, there wasn't a doubt in either heart that they meant every word. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with music provided by a fiddler from town and plenty of food and drink shared among the guests. As twilight fell, lanterns were lit around the yard, casting a golden glow over the dancers. Beatrice found herself taking a moment apart, watching from the porch as Colton conversed animatedly with several of the neighboring ranchers. His easy way with people had already begun building connections that would serve them well in the coming years. "You've done well for yourself," came a voice beside her. Martha Jenkins, a widow who ran the general store in town, joined her at the railing. "He's a good man." "The best," Beatrice agreed, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. "Some of us worried about you, after John passed. Living out here all alone." The older woman glanced at her sideways. "Should have known better, you've always been stronger than most." Beatrice smiled, recognizing the compliment for what it was. "Not stronger, just stubborn," Martha laughed. "That too," she nodded toward Colton. "He seems to appreciate that about you. Not every man would." "No," Beatrice agreed softly. "Not every man would." As if sensing her gaze, Colton looked up and caught her eye across the yard. He excused himself from his conversation and made his way to her, taking the porch steps 2 at a time. "There you are," he said, sliding an arm around her waist. "I was beginning to think my wife had run off already." The word wife sent a pleasant shiver through her. "Just taking a moment to appreciate the view," she replied, leaning into his embrace. Martha smiled knowingly at them both. "I'll leave you two alone. Congratulations again." She patted Beatrice's hand before moving back to join the other guests. Alone on the porch, Colton turned Beatrice to face him. "Happy Mrs. Hayes," she had decided to take his name, a choice that had surprised him but felt right to her. The ranch would always be Coleman land, but she wanted the world to know they were a family now. "Very happy, Mr. Hayes." She reached up to touch his face, marveling that this man was now her husband. "Though I'm beginning to think our guests might never leave." His laugh was low and intimate. "Hoping to get me alone, are you? Perhaps." She glanced over his shoulder at the continued festivities. "Though it seems impolite to wish everyone gone when they've come all this way." Colton pretended to consider the dilemma. "What if we were the ones to disappear instead?" Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind?" Without answering, he took her hand and led her around the side of the house, away from the lantern light and music. They slipped through the orchard, the apple trees just beginning to bud, until they reached the small creek that marked the eastern boundary of the original homestead. In the silvery moonlight, Colton pulled her into his arms. "I've been wanting to kiss you properly all day," he murmured, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of desire long restrained. Beatrice responded eagerly, her hands sliding into his hair, dislodging the careful styling he'd arranged for the wedding. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, she laughed at his disheveled appearance. "What's so funny?" he asked, grinning down at her. "You look thoroughly kissed, Mr. Hayes." She attempted to smooth his hair, though the effort was half-hearted at best. "Good." He captured her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "I am thoroughly kissed and thoroughly in love with my wife." The simple declaration warmed her from within. "I love you too, more than I ever thought possible." They stood together by the creek. The sounds of their wedding celebration, a distant backdrop to the more immediate music of water over stones and the whisper of wind through new leaves. In that moment, Beatrice felt a sense of rightness settle over her, not the completion that comes from being saved or fixed, but the expansion that happens when two whole people choose to build something greater together. "What are you thinking?" Colton asked, his arms secure around her waist. "That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she answered truthfully, "and with exactly who I'm supposed to be with." His smile was tender as he lowered his forehead to rest against hers. "That's good to hear, because I plan on being with you for a very long time, Beatrice Hayes." "Is that a promise?" "The most solemn one I can make." He sealed it with another kiss, this one gentle and reverent. Later, when their guests had finally departed and they were truly alone as husband and wife, Beatrice reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From her fierce independence after John's death to the partnership she now embraced with Colton, she had not surrendered her strength, but rather found new ways to express it. And Colton, true to his word that very first day, had never tried to fix or save her. He had simply loved her, exactly as she was, allowing her the space to love him in return, not from need or desperation, but from choice and desire. As spring gave way to summer, the ranch flourished under their combined care. The expanded grazing area Colton had envisioned became reality, allowing them to increase their herd substantially. They hired 2 young cowboys to help with the additional work, building a new, larger bunkhouse to accommodate them. Beatrice found herself falling into a new rhythm of life, one that balanced her continued independence with the joy of shared purpose. She still rode out alone sometimes, checking fence lines or simply enjoying the solitude of the high meadows, but she no longer felt the need to prove she could do everything by herself. In late August, as they prepared for the fall roundup, Beatrice realized she had missed her monthly courses for the second time. She said nothing to Colton at first, wanting to be certain before raising hopes that had been mentioned but not dwelled upon. By September, there was no doubt she was with child. She chose a quiet evening to tell him, after they had finished supper and were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of orange and pink. The air had the crisp edge of approaching autumn, prompting Colton to drape a blanket around her shoulders as they sat side by side. "I have something to tell you," she began, her voice steady despite the flutter of excitement in her chest. He turned to her, attentive as always. "What is it?" "We're going to have a baby, come spring." Colton's expression transformed from curiosity to wonder in an instant. "A baby, you're sure?" She nodded, a smile spreading across her face at his reaction. "Quite sure. Probably April or early May by my reckoning." "Beatrice," he breathed, reaching for her hands, That's wonderful news." His eyes, always expressive, shone with emotion. "A baby, our baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, though his joy was evident. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He pulled her into a gentle embrace, mindful of her condition even though there was no visible sign of it yet. "I've dreamed of having a family with you, but I didn't want to pressure you. Knew you'd let me know when you were ready." She laughed softly. "I'm not sure readiness had much to do with it. Nature has its own timeline." "Still," he insisted, drawing back to look at her, "you're pleased?" "This is what you want." The question touched her, another reminder of how perfectly Colton understood her need for choice in all things. "Yes," she assured him, "I'm pleased, nervous but excited. I want this our child, our family." Relief and happiness mingled in his expression. "We're going to be parents," he said, the wonder of it evident in his voice. "I'm going to be a father." "And you'll be a wonderful one," she told him with certainty. He placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach, a gesture of connection to the new life growing within. "And you'll be an amazing mother. Strong, loving, teaching our child to be independent and brave just like you." As winter descended once again on the valley, bringing with it shorter days and long, cozy evenings, Beatrice's body changed to accommodate their growing child. Her slender frame rounded, her movements becoming more deliberate as her center of gravity shifted. Colton watched these changes with fascination and concern, insisting on taking over more of her usual tasks despite her protests. "I'm pregnant, not infirm," she reminded him repeatedly. "Humor me," he would reply, pressing a kiss to her forehead, before heading out to handle whatever chore he decided was too strenuous for her. She relented more often than not, secretly touched by his protectiveness even as she maintained it was unnecessary. The truth was, some days she did tire more easily, especially as the pregnancy progressed. On those days, she was grateful for his quiet assumption of duties that allowed her to rest without having to ask. They spent the winter preparing for the baby's arrival, converting the small room adjacent to their bedroom into a nursery, sewing tiny garments during the long evenings, and discussing names that ranged from traditional family choices to more fanciful options inspired by their favorite books. "What about William if it's a boy?" Colton suggested one night as they sat before the fire, Beatrice's feet in his lap as he massaged them gently. "After Shakespeare," she laughed. "I'm not naming our child after a playwright, no matter how talented." "Fair enough, what about Caroline for a girl?" "After your mother," Beatrice considered this, her hand resting on her prominent belly where the baby kicked energetically. "I like that. Caroline Hayes has a nice sound to it. And for a boy," he prompted. She thought for a moment. "What was your father's name?" "Daniel," Colton replied, a softness entering his voice at the memory. "Daniel Hayes. He was a good man, taught me everything I know about ranching, about being honorable. Then Daniel it is if we have a son." She reached for his hand, bringing it to rest alongside hers on her stomach. "Feel that? I think the baby approves." Colton's face lit up as he felt the strong movements beneath his palm. "Strong kick, might have a future rancher in there, or a dancer," Beatrice countered with a smile. "Either way, this child will have every opportunity to become whoever they're meant to be. With you as their mother, I wouldn't expect anything less." As her time grew nearer, Beatrice arranged for Martha Jenkins's daughter, who had training as a midwife, to stay at the ranch for the final weeks. Emma Jenkins arrived in early April, bringing with her a calm competence that reassured both expectant parents. "Everything looks to be progressing normally," she told Beatrice after examining her. "Baby's in the right position, good size, shouldn't be too much longer now." Colton hovered anxiously during these consultations, asking questions that revealed both his excitement and his fear. Emma answered patiently, understanding the concerns of a first-time father. What if something goes wrong? He asked one evening after Emma had retired to the guest room, his voice low so only Beatrice could hear. "We're so far from town from a proper doctor. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," Beatrice reminded him, though she had harbored similar worries herself. "Emma knows what she's doing, and I'm healthy. Try not to worry so much." He gathered her close, his hand splayed protectively over her rounded belly. "Can't help it. You and this baby are everything to me." The labor began 2 days later, waking Beatrice before dawn with unmistakable contractions. She roused Colton, who immediately went to fetch Emma while trying to maintain a calm facade that fooled neither of them. What followed was 18 hours of the hardest work Beatrice had ever done. Through it all, Colton remained by her side, wiping her brow, supporting her through contractions, and murmuring encouragement when her strength flagged. Emma directed them both with the steady assurance of experience, never showing concern even when the labor stretched into the night. Finally, as the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, their daughter made her entrance into the world with a robust cry that brought tears to Colton's eyes. "A girl," Emma announced, quickly wrapping the squirming infant in a clean blanket. "A beautiful, healthy girl." She placed the baby on Beatrice's chest, where tiny hands immediately flexed and a red face screwed up in continued protest at the indignity of birth. Beatrice gazed down at her daughter in wonder, all the pain and exhaustion of labor fading in the face of this miracle. "Hello, Caroline," she whispered, using the name they had chosen. Welcome to the world. Colton leaned in, one arm around Beatrice's shoulders, the other hand gently touching their daughter's downy head. She's perfect, he said, his voice thick with emotion, just like her mother. Beatrice looked up at him, seeing in his tear-filled eyes the same overwhelming love she felt. "We did this," she said softly. "Together." "Together," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Always together." In the days that followed, they settled into the rhythms of new parenthood, the middle of the night feedings, the learning curve of diaper changing and swaddling, the shared awe at every tiny yawn and stretching movement. Caroline proved to be a good-natured baby, with Beatrice's blue eyes and what already promised to be Colton's dark hair. Spring bloomed fully around them as they adjusted to life as a family of three. The ranch continued to prosper, with the hired hands taking on additional responsibilities during those early weeks to allow Colton more time with his wife and daughter. By summer, they had established a new normal that incorporated Caroline into the fabric of their daily lives. Beatrice found that motherhood, rather than diminishing her independence, gave it new purpose. She wanted her daughter to grow up seeing a mother who was strong, capable, and fulfilled a woman who had chosen partnership without sacrificing herself. Colton, for his part, proved to be the devoted father she had expected. He seemed to delight in every aspect of Caroline's care, from rocking her to sleep to taking her with him on gentle rides around the property, her tiny form secure in a sling across his chest. "She'll be riding on her own before we know it," he predicted one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset with Caroline dozing in Beatrice's arms. "Not too soon, I hope," Beatrice replied with a smile. "Let's enjoy her being this small for a while." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It goes by quickly, doesn't it? Seems like yesterday we were just finding out about her, and now she's already 3 months old." "Time has a different quality now," she agreed, "more precious somehow." Colton reached over to stroke Caroline's cheek with one finger, his touch infinitely gentle. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been if I hadn't ridden onto your land that day?" Beatrice considered the question. "Sometimes. I was so determined to manage alone." "Probably would have continued that way if you hadn't been so persistent." "Persistent?" He raised an eyebrow, amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. "Is that what you call it? What would you call it?" "Smitten," he replied without hesitation. "Completely smitten from the moment I saw you standing there with that revolver, looking like you'd shoot me as soon as look at me." She laughed softly, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "I considered it. Thank goodness you're a better judge of character than that." He leaned closer, dropping a kiss on her shoulder, "Or I'd have missed out on all of this." "So would I," she admitted. "I'm glad you were persistent, smitten, whatever you want to call it. And I'm glad you were brave enough to take a chance on us, on love." His eyes held hers, still filled with the same warmth and admiration she'd first recognized on that autumn day nearly 2 years earlier. "Even though you didn't need saving." "Especially because I didn't need saving," she corrected gently. "Because you understood that from the start. You really saw me when everyone else was seeing a widow who couldn't possibly manage on her own." "I saw a woman who could do anything she set her mind to," Colton said. "Still do." Beatrice smiled, feeling the familiar surge of love for this man who had entered her life unexpected and become essential to her happiness without ever becoming essential to her survival. "That's why I love you, why I'll always love you. And I'll always love you," he promised, "just as you are. Strong, independent, and completely capable of handling anything life throws at us." Caroline stirred in her sleep, one tiny hand escaping the blanket to curl around her mother's finger. Beatrice looked down at their daughter, then back at her husband, overcome for a moment by the perfection of what they had built together. "This is more than I ever thought I'd have again," she confessed. "A family, a future full of possibilities." "It's just the beginning," Colton assured her, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "We have a lifetime ahead of us." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Beatrice leaned into her husband's embrace, their daughter sleeping peacefully between them. The ranch stretched out before them, the land they had nurtured together, the home they had created not through necessity but through choice. She thought back to that first conversation, to her fierce declaration of independence and his unexpected response. "I don't need a savior," she had said, and he had replied, "Good. I came to love you, not fix you." In the end, that had made all the difference. Not a rescue, but a meeting of equals. Not a surrender, but a joining of strengths. Not fixing what was broken, but loving what was whole. And in that love, they had found something neither had been looking for, but both had needed a partnership that enhanced rather than diminished, that supported without smothering, that valued independence while celebrating connection. As twilight deepened into night, stars appearing one by one in the vast Montana sky, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world not alone, as she had once believed was her destiny, but alongside the man who had loved her for her strength, and with the child who represented their shared future. It was, she thought, the most perfect kind of happy ending, one that was actually a beginning, stretching endlessly before them with promise and possibility.